ở đây để nghe.
Xuống kêu tụi nó là start đi.
Okay. I'm going to begin this lecture, but perhaps.
good morning.
Good morning. I find it, I don't know. Maybe one day somebody will like look at the YouTube clips and learn something from this lecture. I think I think there's also like purpose behind this lecture, especially in English. And if there is no audience, I don't know how I feel about that. It's interesting to think about. Do you continue to lecture if there is no audience? Who knows? Right? It's worth a thought. But I guess I will go through the motions anyway. And I'm like 5 minutes late. I have a lot to get through, so let us talk. Okay. Alright. So what did we talk about last week? I said like, oh yeah, maybe you guys don't really understand anything that I'm talking about because you haven't lived life yet. So when I talk about these things, maybe probably you don't get it right away, but eventually you'll get it, right? I think it's a natural process of adults. Most adults tell you it's like, oh yeah. Actually, it's funny because like in middle school, when you guys have homeworks and projects and like life is so stressful, I'm sure like some adults tell you like, oh, don't worry, it'll get better. And then most kids' responses are, but you don't understand. But actually, adults do understand. They've gone through that process already. But anyway, that's going on a tangent. The other thing that we talked about last week is like, instead of asking first why Buddhism, it's better to ask like why religion, right? Like why even bother about religion? And then we talked about like the purpose of religion to begin with, right? And it's really interesting. If you think about it, there's something like very universal about religion. Like if you pick any single culture across this globe, even before present time, every single culture, even in the prehistoric times with like the Incas, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, and you go to like ancient Egypt or ancient Rome or ancient Greece, guess what they all had in common? They had religion in common, right? It's like a primary characteristics of a civilization, right? You have like other things that make up a civilization, but religion happens to be one of them, right? And so it's like, why is this the case? It's such a universal trend. Like everybody in the world, right, past or present, gravitate towards religion. And so the analogy that I started making when we were talking about religion is that at some point, we all go to the doctor. Just like at some point, every single civilization looks for religion, right? And so, what's the doctor's job? 3 things, right? The doctor has 3 jobs. Whenever somebody goes to the doctor, they have 3 jobs. First, have a full diagnosis, like see exactly what's going on. You're not really an effective doctor if somebody shows up and all they do is look at your feet. Right? Can you imagine? Like that's kind of silly. It's like, oh, my head hurts and my stomach hurts, and the doctor's like, all right, show me your feet. Let me see what's going on here. That's actually pretty silly and hilarious to some extent. So the doctor's job is to do a full diagnosis, right? Take all your blood samples, check your eyes, ears, your breathing, your lungs, your heart, etc. Full diagnosis. And then, after you do the full diagnosis, what does the doctor do? He has to identify what the illness is. Like, what's the cause of your illness at this point? And then, after that, so diagnosis, figuring out the cause, and then he finally, if he's an effective doctor, he gives you the treatment, right? that's the same thing with religion. Religion, the idea of religion, what makes an effective religion, I mean, it's up to you to decide. But it's really, hey, can they give you like a full diagnosis of what's going on? Can they tell you what's the cause of your suffering? And then can they treat it at the root, okay? And so, we can't, like, this lecture is not to evaluate any other religion. What it is to tell you, hey, why Buddhism? Well, Buddhism does all these three things. It does the job that the doctor is supposed to do, right? Which is, well, it tells you, first and foremost, it gives you the full diagnosis. It gives you like this big picture. And so, for the Buddha, like, the problem with suffering is at the cornerstone. It's like the central idea of all of the Buddha's teaching, okay? And so in the first of his like Four Noble Truths, the first thing that he ever mentions is this Pali word, which is dukkha, okay? Now, dukkha, it's translated often to mean suffering. But this idea of suffering, and at some point I feel like this is the part where I begin to lose you, right? Because first I'm telling you, there's an analogy here. We all have religion. Everybody gravitates towards religion. Everybody gravitates towards a doctor when they're sick. But let me tell you, like, very much like the doctor giving this full diagnosis, Buddhism gives the full diagnosis as well. And here's what the full diagnosis is saying, okay? There's suffering, period. And it's actually deeper than pain or misery. And they kind of defined it as like a level of like unsatisfactoriness that lies at the edge of our awareness. That you really don't know that you're missing something at all, right? But it's there. And like I said, like most kids won't understand, adults will, especially when they fully live their life and they still realize, oh, I've got my money, I've got my car, my job, my house, my family, my everything, and yet something is missing from my life. And that's the spiritual aspect, and that's why people gravitate towards religion, right? And so this level of unsatisfactoriness, this level of suffering, the way that it like shows itself, the way that it manifests itself is through things like grief, sorrow, disappointment, and despair. And so according to the Buddha, right, suffering or this level of unsatisfactoriness is the only real spiritual problem that anybody ever has, okay? It's that thing that feels like you're missing. Right now you guys have tons of things to worry about, like schoolwork and grades and making friends and being popular, and so there isn't time or a place for you to reflect, to ask yourself like, what's missing, right? But yeah, so this is it. Like this idea of suffering is so central, and it's like I just have to like dive a little bit more. So there's two parts to the idea of suffering, right? The first piece of how like we are, and it's so funny because it's like this entire lecture sounds like very gloomy because we talk about suffering so much, but it's also like a truth of life, and it's a fact of life. And if you want to ever become good at anything, and it's actually, there's this funny book called From Good to Great, and it talks about companies and how like companies become like basic companies and they become amazing companies. And one of the very first chapters from Good to Great is confronting the brutal facts, right? If you can't look in the mirror or if you can't reflect on like where you guys are and confronting brutal facts, then you'll never become great. So anyway, that's like a side tangent to this idea that the first evidence of suffering is the physical side, right? The process of life itself. So thinking about birth, I mean, it's not a pleasant time for babies, it's not a pleasant time for moms, right? Especially the entire birthing process. But the other physical side is the constant aging. And it's kind of weird because talking to kids, you guys kind of want to get older. You guys kind of want to become 18 and 21, right? Because between 18 and 21, you can do all the things that adults want to do. So you guys look forward to aging. But after you get past 21, guess what most people past 21 wishes? Their number one wish is that they didn't wish they would age so much, right? Because when you hit 30, then you start becoming fat. Well, not fat, but your metabolism slows down. Like people start putting on weight. And then when you hit 40, your knees start to hurt, like mine, and like you have leg issues. And then 50, 60, then you start having health problems. And then this entire this entire physical process with your body, it's very interesting. And I don't know if you guys ever thought about this, but our bodies are very, very fragile, right? If you ever think about it, there's so many things across the world that can actually kill you. So many things, so many sharp objects, fast cars. There's so many things that can actually kill you. And our body is very susceptible to sickness. Some people get sick very easily. There's accidents, injuries, and even the physical, the very day-to-day things. We get hungry and get thirsty, right? Can you imagine, I dare you, go the entire day without drinking water. See how bad your body's gonna feel. Go the entire day without eating. See how bad your body's gonna feel, right? So that level of suffering, it's present. The question is, are you aware that it's present, right? And so that's just the first part of the diagnosis. And then there's the physical on one side, and then there's the emotional, the mental, what's going on in your brain right this moment. And in fact, besides the basic needs of your body, like food and water and shelter or whatever, the vast majority of your suffering goes on the inside of you, right? And it appears as sorrow, anger, frustration, and fear. And it really comes from feelings of being separated from things that you want, or having an unpleasant encounter, or not getting things that you ever want. I mean, it's so funny. You ever seen I don't know, you guys are closer to that age, but you ever seen a little kid want a toy from the store, and the parents are like, no, you can't get that toy, and then the kid starts crying and throwing a tantrum? Or maybe it's happened to you guys recently, where you wanted maybe a certain smartphone or something, and your parents are like, no, you can't have that, and then you start feeling really bad. It's very interesting because we can look at that process of the kids being denied what they want, or even a certain candy or food, and then they're experiencing this level of suffering, and you're like, wow, But I don't know. That's just a side thought. But all right, so we're talking about suffering, but then the question is, why aren't we talking about the other side of life, which is the pleasures of life, right? Well, the interesting thing about pleasures of life, let's just say you having your favorite meal, or it's a beautiful day, things like that, right? The most fascinating thing about the pleasures of the life is that it's always temporary. It's never permanent, right? Even if the pleasure comes, it always goes, no matter what. If you ever felt really good one day, does it always stay that way? Not really. So, in fact, it's while they last, we feel really good, but when they go away, that feeling of loss leaves us feeling even worse sometimes, it's very interesting. And also, there's in economics, right? Too much pleasure is a bad thing, and you become desensitized to it. There's this fascinating idea, it's called the law of diminishing returns. I don't know if I've ever spoken to you guys about this, but imagine this. You're very, very, very hungry. You have not eaten for 2 days. That means you skip breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're supremely hungry, right? Now, imagine this. I put in front of you this delicious bowl of pho or whatever, right? Or maybe a steak, I don't know. Whatever your favorite food is. You take the first bite. How good is that going to feel? Really, really good, right? And then you take a second bite. It's probably going to be good, right? And then you take your 10th bite. How good do you think that bowl of pho or that steak feels like after that? And then, what if I gave you instead of like, after one piece of steak, I gave you 10 pieces of steak and I told you to eat that. All of a sudden, or 10 bowls of something like that. All of a sudden, the thing that once brought you pleasure because you were super hungry doesn't actually mean anything to you anymore. You become like desensitized to it. So pleasure is actually very fleeting, right? It's temporary. And so this is the basis of our lives, really. What do we spend our lives doing? We run towards pleasure or satisfying our needs, and then we run away from pain. What else do you guys do in life then, if not those two things? It's worth thinking about, right? And so then the idea is like, okay, the real satisfaction and happiness and peace is always like, it's never there. It's always like whatever you can get next, okay? And then we're chasing pleasure, avoiding pain. We're chasing, and then one day we just die. Isn't that interesting? But it also, very curiously, in death, the Buddha teaches that like our mental continuum, like our stream of consciousness just pops elsewhere, and then we get reborn. And so we have this like cycle of life, a cycle of rebirth called like samsara, right? And so, what is it? No matter how far you go back, it's always been like living beings, like what animals, dinosaurs, whatever, right? Like there's no like beginning point of time, which is like fascinating. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about this, but we have the present, and then you guys have the past. But have you guys ever thought about the beginning of time? Most people think it's like the Big Bang, but then the easiest question to ask yourself is, what happened before the Big Bang? Right? So time is just like a continuum, and so it's really interesting, but within your lifetime, and I guess I'll close this out because it'll be short because I don't have time for everything else, but there's two types of suffering, right? There's suffering within your lifetime, and there's suffering throughout your lifetime. Whether you guys believe it or not, like you guys have had, according to like this Buddhist tradition, like multiple rebirths. Right? Every single person here has had multiple rebirths, right? So let's just say this is like one lifetime, this is another lifetime, this is another lifetime. Not only do you have suffering within a lifetime, but throughout your lifetime you have suffering. So this is the big picture. This is the full diagnosis that Buddhism is saying, that the Buddha has found, right? If that's the diagnosis, what's the solution? And well, the solution happens to be escaping this process, right? You winning like emancipation from going through this cycle of rebirth. Because whether you want to or not, like we are going to be reborn again and again and again. And so it's up to us to actually, to some extent, like win liberation from it. What does that mean to you guys? Nothing yet, because I don't really know anything. Yeah, neither do I. So it's fine. Okay, diagnosis done. What does the doctor do next after he does his full diagnosis? He looks for the cause, right? He's looking for like what's happening on the mental. Oh no, not really. Well, he's asking what's the root causes of suffering. If suffering is a diagnosis, you need to know what's the root cause of suffering. And so, where does that feeling come from? Where does the feeling of suffering come from? I think that's worth like, well, we have 9 minutes, that's perfect. Okay, let's go through the causes of suffering then. We have physical suffering, which is the physical process of aging. But we have the mental side of suffering. Everything that you've ever felt comes from disorders within our own minds, okay? And they're translated from the Pali word to mean, they're translated to defilements, okay? Defilements. don't know why this sounds different today. Okay, defilements. And this is three, they call it the triad: greed, aversion, and delusion. They sometimes like name it something else, but I'll just go through like briefly the three things, the three root causes of most suffering. Okay, greed. You guys should know what greed is, because it's like an everyday word, but it basically means like this like self-centered desire, right? Desire for pleasure and possessions, the drive for survival, the urge to bolster the sense of evil with power, status, and prestige. I don't think, to some extent, everybody is a little bit greedy, okay? Like, not greedy in that traditional sense, but we all want some certain pleasures in life. We all want, to some extent, some money. We all want, to some extent, like some clothing. Maybe recognition for being like the smartest person. Recognition for being a great kid. No matter how small or how big, to some extent, we're all a little bit greedy, right? So that's like the first cause that's one of the first defilements. And then aversion. Aversion is just a fancy word for hatred, anger, like violence, rejection, and irritation, right? I mean, have you ever woken up and felt like really irritable? Or maybe sitting here at this lecture feeling really irritable? Like, oh God, you know? Like, that's a source of suffering. It's very interesting. And then finally, the third cause of suffering is delusion, right? It's mental darkness. It's like a level of ignorance, a cope of insensitivity. The other day, I was opening up my news app, right? New York Post. Don't ever, well, I wouldn't say don't ever read it, but all the bad news in the world always stems from these three things: greed, aversion, and delusion. There's always like people being murdered. There's always like silly stuff that goes on in this world, like really bad and negative stuff, and they always stem from these three things, right? And so those are the three root causes, right? And he actually says this really interesting thing, which is that like there's one thing that gives rise to these three root causes to begin with, right? And that's ignorance. And he made a very important distinction. Ignorance is not the mere lack of knowledge, because you could be very well read, you could read a lot of books, you could have a lot of knowledge in your brain, but you could also still be ignorant. So it's not a lack of knowledge, okay? It's just a certain like darkness that clouds your mind. It's a certain it's just like a veil over your eyes. So you could know a lot of things, but if that veil is still in front of your eyes, you won't be able to see, right? And so ignorance plays a big part in our lives, right? And it's either passive ignorance or active ignorance. And passive ignorance basically means like maybe it's hiding a correct understanding on your part that you might not know because you haven't learned it yet. But the active ignorance is like when there is, like, you have distorted perceptions of like this world and reality. But yeah, okay. So let's zoom out very quickly because this is gonna close. I'm gonna close everything. Here it is, right? You have suffering. That's the diagnosis. Life is suffering. Great. The next piece, the root causes. The root cause is defilements, right? Defilements. And the cause of defilements truly is ignorance. If you don't know any better, then you're gonna do bad things. Okay? Ignorance. All the bad things that happens in the news, I don't think the people who are committing these acts know any better, right? Or maybe they did, but it's just a true form of ignorance. So the question is, what's the solution? What's the treatment for ignorance? The treatment and the true adversary to ignorance is not knowledge, because you can still be ignorant with knowledge. It's wisdom. Okay? Now, again, wisdom is not just reading more things and acquiring more knowledge. That's not wisdom at all. That's just knowledge, right? It's it's not conceptual knowledge, they call it, it's more like perceptual knowledge. It's the ability to see things as they are. And so it's like, if you can't get wisdom from books, how can you get wisdom? That's like an interesting conversation for you guys to, like an interesting thought process for you to think about, right? It's like, if you can't read a book to become wise, what is it that you can do to become wise? Because there are wise people out there. There are people with wisdom. The question is, how is wisdom to be gained? I mean, luckily, like the Buddha says, like wisdom can be cultivated, right? And his solution, if you ever wanted to cultivate wisdom, is for us to be walking down the Noble Eightfold Path. And so, there it is, in a nutshell. And I feel like this might have been like a redundant speech, but it's for you guys to like truly understand, because the more I read about this, the more I understand. And it's not just understanding, it's perceiving, okay? And so, maybe next time I'll do a more effective job, like distinguishing the two. But the the first 2 Saturdays in October will be the next time I speak about walking down, about the middle way, and how is the middle way, the path that helps us win emancipation, basically. Okay, thank you. That's it for today.